Okay, we are going to go.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the March 2024 Legacies and Lunch, a hybrid program of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, the CALS Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register Zabindon, the Programs and Website Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art at the Central Arkansas Library System. So now until December of 2024, maybe a little longer, I probably need to talk to you about that, Marta. We will be presenting Legacies and Lunch from UA Little Rock downtown, this space at 333 President Clinton Avenue. So I want to thank Marta and Emily for giving us a home for our program while the main library is being renovated. If you want to sign up to be part of our mailing list, our email list, we don't do snail mail anymore, it's an email list, and get more information about the Roberts Library, you can sign up here on the sign-up sheet, or you can go to robertslibrary.org, hit the subscribe button, and put in your email address, and you'll get all kinds of great information about what we're doing. Parking stickers, I did not get parking stickers today. I got to do that, Miss Madeleine. So I'll get parking stickers if anybody needs to get validated for their parking. Please consider donating to the CALS Foundation to support the programs, thank you, Joe, for Butler Center for Arkansas Studies and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. You can go to robertslibrary.org or encyclopediaofarkansas.net to give a one-time or recurring monthly donation. Your support would be greatly appreciated. So today's talk is being live streamed to YouTube, and it'll be available on the CALS YouTube channel immediately following the program. We'll take questions at the end of the session, obviously live in person here in the room as well as on Zoom. So folks on Zoom, you can put your questions into the chat box and we'll answer them. Well, Nate will answer them at the end of the session. So for folks in person, please silence your cell phones. Okay, so for today's program, we have Nathan Marvin, Assistant Professor of European History at UA Little Rock. His research, focusing on slavery and resistance in the French colonial world, has been supported by the Camargo, is that how you pronounce it? Okay, Foundation, I meant to ask you that beforehand. And the American Society for 18th Century Studies, as well as a Mellon Fellow, Mellon Fellowship from the Social Science Research Council. So, Nate, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Oh, this is what I use?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks to CALS. Thanks for folks joining online. Okay, so I'm very excited to share with you two new projects that we're working on at UA Little Rock. One in partnership with UA Little Rock Downtown, and one is something brand new that I've started and hopefully am having some support from my students for down the line. And I'll be talking about that first. So first I want to have you guys imagine a scenario. Okay, so you're driving west from Memphis into Little Rock. And you cross into the city at, I think it's I-450, that bridge, all right? And you're looking down on the Arkansas. Arkansas has an S at the end, but it's not pronounced for some reason. You see the beautiful cottonwood poplars, those sandbars, all the barges spread out before you. And then you see signs as you enter Little Rock, Thibault Road, Fush, Dam Pike. You get into downtown Little Rock, and then you might squeak on downtown, go on La Harpe Boulevard, out to Highway 10, and you start seeing other signs that look vaguely French. There's a Petit Jean State Park. There's a place called Shinall Parkway, and a town called Maumelle. Okay, so that was my experience about 5.5 years ago when I first ever came to Arkansas, having joined the Department of History faculty at UA Little Rock. And I was really excited and curious because I'm a little French historian here, and I'm seeing all these vaguely French names. But it was really my confusion about these names, how they were pronounced by local people, what they actually meant, what they stood for, that led me to want to learn more. And so this first project is really a result of these questions that I've had over the years, and it's still in its infancy. but I hope that it can serve eventually as a useful and meaningful public history resource for people in Arkansas. And after, I'll discuss my plans for the project at the end and walk you through first its premise and some of its features and discoveries. Okay, so first, let's do the background, right? French roots, we all know, run deep in Arkansas. It was here near the original site of Arkansas Post in the late 17th century that Sieur de la Salle established what he imagined would be the center of French Empire in North America. What actually emerged did indeed encompass Arkansas, a vast arc of French forts and settlements linking the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes and beyond, the Northern Atlantic, and France itself. And French officials hoped this network of settlements and trading posts would serve as a bulwark, hemming in the growth of British colonies to the east and Spanish encroachment to the south and west. And we think we know the rest of the story. French ambitions in North America came to a grinding halt with their loss to Great Britain in the 7 Years' War and through the Spanish takeover of the territory known as Louisiana. That preserved many French cultural, religious, and legal customs. Most of the remaining Francophone communities, though, were stamped out when the 1803 sale of this vast region to the United States opened the door to rapid Anglo-American settlement. Okay, now what I've found is that Creole culture in Arkansas actually persisted long after that. Hunters and settlers with French names, including enslaved or formerly enslaved people of African or indigenous descent, continued to live and work in this region well into the 19th century. And for a time they coexisted with Anglo-American migrants, and indeed, new French speakers continued to arrive, albeit in comparatively small numbers, even after Arkansas's acquisition by the United States and annexation as a territory in 1819. So the aims of this project, which I call Arkansas Creole or Creole Arkansas, are threefold. To demonstrate, one, that the French of Arkansas left a rich legacy in the region that merits deeper exploration. Two, that the Arkansas Creole presence and culture persisted well into the 19th century. And three, that this culture was, for the most part, originally forged and carried on by families of mixed indigenous and European as well as African heritage. So this is a public-facing project, and it doesn't claim to be exhaustive in scope. I'm not seeking to make a major intervention in the scholarly literature. Instead, I'm aiming to use it to serve as a corrective to the collective memory of French roots in Arkansas. And this goal is based on a synthesis of recent scholarship and a few novel archival discoveries of my own. I'm hoping that with the more accurate rendering of the past in this region, we can perhaps foster a fuller and more meaningful sense of place. So what I'm going to show you now is mostly a mapping project, and the idea is to present the stories of the people behind the toponymy, the place names of Arkansas's vernacular Creole landscapes. And this is especially important, I think, in our region here in Little Rock, where French place names have been manipulated or invented, even for advertising purposes through foreign branding practices, or to elevate a unidimensional and whitewashed, in all senses of the term, history of the region's French roots. Indeed, if there's an argument to my talk today, it is that there is a continuity of practice here to whitewash and erase the diversity of experiences and the enduring legacy of Creole Arkansas, inadvertently or not, through selective remembering, mythologizing, and promotional strategies from the late 19th century and into the 20th. So I'm going to pull up the website now, hopefully it cooperates with me. Okay, so the project Arkansas Creole is designed to work on mobile devices, tablets, and the computer. And I'm going to walk us through a couple of these items. First, I contextualize everything here by locating Arkansas as part of what historians call the Creole corridor. So this is basically a scattering of settlements all throughout the North American heartland that extends basically from the St. Lawrence Valley through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi River. And what historians have found is that the people and places here, they persist into the 19th century, and they are actually politically influential and commercially influential in most of this corridor, perhaps not so much in Arkansas. because not as densely settled as the Illinois country establishments to the north, which spill into the Ozark Mountains, or the plantation zones of the Canaan and Red Rivers to the south, Arkansas was a linchpin connecting these French-speaking areas. And for many years, the Arkansas Post was the only major settlement between what is now the Missouri-Illinois border and the state of Louisiana. And this is a fascinating photo from Nady, Arkansas. I hope that's how you pronounce it, of the Minach home. And this is the last vestige of poteau en sol construction. So this is vernacular Creole architecture you see all over upper Louisiana. And it existed here in Arkansas. It existed throughout Arkansas Post 2. Unfortunately, the Union Army blew the entire place up. So we have very few vestiges of the built landscape in that particular site. Okay, so I mentioned scholarship. This project is seeking to build on the pioneering work of Kathleen Duvall, Morris Arnold, and Sonia Tucci. These historians have done much to uproot long-standing myths about French Arkansas. So what are those myths? One of them is that this region is this romantic place, benign and bucolic. 18th century and 19th century observers from the outside often talked about the people here as carefree, living off the land in a harmonious proximity to indigenous nations, preferring the thrilling lives of freewheeling voyageurs to sedentary lives of farming or industry. In reality, it was a world of scattered settlements with mixed agricultural and commercial enterprises, and it was first inhabited by men and women with very little choice in their destinies. This included deportees from France, sent to the penal colony that was Louisiana, and enslaved African and African descended people. And so the foundation of this world was also partly laid through the dispossession of Native American people who were drawn into its orbit as captives. Indeed, this is something we don't think about a lot. The enslavement of indigenous as well as African people was a prominent feature of Creole Arkansas society from its beginnings. Francophone Arkansas was bolstered by an influx of French-speaking settlers from across the Mississippi in the Illinois country who crossed because they knew that their ability to continue practicing slavery would be respected on the Spanish sides. And here's a little visual representation of that romanticizing. This is George Bingham's famous 1845 painting, which he originally entitled French Trader, Half-Breed Son. So one of the parts of this romanticization was the romanticization of what's called métissage in French, which means mixing. This is cultural mixing, and very often it means the mixing of indigenous and European people. And this mixing has been imagined in popular memory, but also in a lot of scholarship until recently as evidence of a more benign form of racial thinking than you had in the Anglo-American world. Unfortunately, this was not, of course, the case, and a lot of coercion went into these intermarriage and cohabitation situations. Okay. So all of the facts that this project is trying to highlight are pushing back against those tropes that we're still living with that endure from the 19th century United States of an American West imagined as sparsely populated by Indians and backward Frenchmen ripe for the taking, right? This was the thinking that underpinned Manifest Destiny, Indian removal policies, and the US government's rejection of most land claims made by French and Spanish-speaking families in the Louisiana Territory in the 19th century. Okay, so for generations in Arkansas itself, the French period of Arkansas history, when not neglected altogether, was romanticized, oversimplified, and whitewashed. So beginning at the turn of the 20th century, you have textbooks describing the French presence as ephemeral in the state's history, and they revert to stereotypes about ignorant settlers who live in improper proximity to American Indians, and other texts elevated popular understandings of the time about metropolitan French people. They're refined in manners and tastes, but ultimately they're bad at empire building, and they vanish as soon as Anglo-Americans arrive. These statements, though, in the textbooks, they fly in the face of what most Arkansans knew to be fact, that French-speaking families continued to live and work in the region well into the 19th century. As historian John Michael Lucy wrote in a 1908 text on the history of the Catholic Church in Arkansas, until about 50 years ago, so middle of the 19th century, the influence of French immigrants in their mode of life was very strong. Many of our mountains and streams and some of our cities and their streets bear French names or Gallicized Indian names. Fouche-la-Fave, Petit Jean, Vache-Grasse are just such streams. The two latter near Fort Smith, Fouche and Mamel Mountains lie not far from Little Rock, Baracoo, colonel under Bonaparte on Marengo and Austerlitz, is commemorated by a street in Pine Bluff. Noble and Notre are familiar names in southwestern Arkansas, as well as Bourgie, who came from Canada, La Salle and Lefebvre, and others. And this is all accurate information, okay, about the French place names that persisted in the landscape, and they persist today. It was still in living memory for people, even in the early 20th century, the people who were behind the place names themselves. So these names are corrupted in local parlance, and they actually refer to real people very often, even though we assume because they're names of like animals and colors and things like that, that they don't. But one of the things about this project is that I like to take names that we're familiar with and click to reveal the original French spellings. And you can see that a lot of what we have here is corruption, where Anglo-Americans heard French names, particularly as pronounced in a Canadian accent, okay? So forget what you think about refined Parisian accents here, and then they're rendering them exactly as they're hearing them, phonetically. Okay, so let's go into a couple examples of that, because these were kind of fun for me to discover. So one of the features of this map is that you can see all the layers here. You can see modern naming, you can see original French names for places, and this is an accumulating body of evidence, a data set here that I'm using crowdsourcing to get some information from, also several pieces of scholarship about French toponymy in Arkansas. Okay, so we have some famous ones. Here, what I've done also is highlight the importance of the watersheds, so they feature prominently, and those actual counties of Arkansas established in the early 19th century. That's an 1855 map underneath. I'm kind of trying to visually subsume them, trying to invert the processes whereby these places were buried by dumping it underground a little bit. And those counties, right, they're very regular and they're named after Anglo-American figures, but just underneath the surface, you have these persisting French names. Okay, so one of the most famous is Chemin Couvert, or in the Canadian pronunciation, this would be Chemin Couvert, and that is the town of Smackover. So there's these things where if you like pronounce it over and over again enough in your mouth, you hear where Anglo-American settlers got their ideas from. Bayou Métaux is actually from the French word métaux, which was the deposits of ore in the river, the metals, literally in the river. So there's lots of different examples of this, and users of the map can play around with all of that, and when they click on a feature, you get the reference to the feature as well as all the names that have ever been recorded for it over time. Okay, as I'm rapidly running out of time, I thought that I would just choose one example. So skipping over the beautiful stories that I have for you about Bayou country, southeast Arkansas. I'm going to talk about our one region here because the discoveries that I made were very exciting. As somebody who loves living in Little Rock, who's always been really fascinated by these strange French names everywhere, I was really, really interested in this part of it. Okay, so the phenomenon that I'm talking about, this renaming kind of situation, it happens in central Arkansas too. And it happens in a couple really important ways that we've all heard of. One is the naming of La Harpe Boulevard itself, which happened in the middle of the 20th century. And the other one is the Saracen Casino by the Quapaw Nation. And my favorite, the Shinall Parkway project. So first of all, La Harpe, yes, he was chosen as a suitably prominent person for city planners to honor in the midst of the Little Rock High School crisis in 1957, no less. But he never set foot in Little Rock, much less established a settlement here, short he passed by. And Shinall, in a roundabout way, more aptly captures the French-speaking heritage of the region. That spelling is the invention of real estate developers who rebranded Shinall Mountain, S-H-I-N-A-L-L, which was itself a corruption of the name Shinall, okay? Which were a local family of Métis, Métis being the word for mixed European and indigenous people in French. And in what is now Pulaski County, there were multiple French-speaking families registering claims to land with the US government in the early 19th century still. Okay? So many of these were French or Métis, and their settlements are clearly marked in early maps as French hunting village. And despite the wave of migrants coming from the east, the Arkansas Valley did not cease to be culturally Creole overnight. This was also the case in the Little Rock region, although by 1828, the first county tax roll shows the remaining French-speaking families overwhelmingly outnumbered by newcomers. And this right here is where I'm going to pause, because we got to put to rest the debate, okay? And that is it La Petite Roche or Le Petit Rocher? Because a lot of the tourism stuff in Little Rock shows that Petite Roche is the French word for Little Rock. This is not in fact grammatically correct, because roche or roc is the word for the material of a rock and not a geographical feature, which would be a rocher. So the beautiful big rock area across the river here was called Le Rocher Français, the French rock. And this one on our side of the river, before it was demolished to make way for a rail bridge, was called Le Petit Rocher. And we have actual documented evidence of this. Father Saunier of Arkansas Post had a census drawn up in 1830 of all the Catholics in Arkansas, and he has Fort Smith here, Post of Arkansas, Jefferson County generally, and Petit Rocher as the name of Little Rock. And by the way, there were 38 white Catholics living here and 3 black Catholics on his census, which was divided in those categories for every place. Then there's another unexpected connection, and this is how I first got interested in considering the French heritage of the region, and that is the presence of Haitian Revolution refugees. So there were more recent Francophone migrants to the area in the early 19th century, and some of these were from Haiti, okay? Haiti, of course, had undergone a revolution from 1791 to 1804, and it was during that period that slavery expanded geographically in the United States, including west of the Mississippi into Arkansas. And this expansion was aided in no small part by an influx of emigres from Haiti. So these are white people and free people of color who brought enslaved servants and pro-slavery convictions. So Arkansas, as part of that historic Louisiana region, it did attract people who thought that they could find land here, and also that there would be French-speaking people here. And one of the most prominent families in this small migration are a family called the Thibault. The Thibault family had emigrated during the Haitian Revolution and settled in Philadelphia, where they had a practice as silversmiths. And this is a little piece of their handiwork from Philly in 1810 to 1836. Now, they bought land on what is now Fush Island and established a plantation that was called the Thibault House for a very long time. It stood kind of south of where the airport is now. And this Thibault family assimilated very quickly into Protestant Anglophone society. And in fact, one of their descendants, whose name is David Thibault, became a famous short story writer in Arkansas. And they were a very wealthy family that had built on kind of that prestige, the fact that slavery endured in Arkansas, and the fact that land was plentiful to settle there. And the Thibauts were perhaps the most influential descendants of the Haitian Revolution emigres in Arkansas, but they're not the only ones. We have US Census records indicating that there's a couple named Marchand, also of Little Rock, originally from Saint-Domingue, living here in the 19th century. There's an El Dorado resident in 1850 who has a wife born in Saint-Domingue. And 30 years later, a Haitian-born preacher named Israel Derricks appears in the historical record living in Hot Springs. Also, a very prominent family called Morin from Saint-Domingue became slave owners in Monroe County. And in 1858, the state Supreme Court heard a case brought by the widow Morin, a refugee, so was the quote, from the island of Saint Domingo, the colonial name of Haiti, who was suing another party over ownership of slaves, perhaps also from the island. And only further research is going to really reveal what was going on with that case, but it's just more evidence to show you that there are Haitian Revolution refugees throughout Arkansas. So the final little bit of evidence that I'm going to present to you is what I discovered about the origins of this person, Petit Jean. Okay, so at first, when I learned about Petit Jean, this was the first time I ever came to Arkansas. I heard them speak the word Petit Jean State Park on KUAR, and I got really excited because I recognized that as a French thing. And I'm like, what is the story behind that place? Of course I drove up, went to the famous tomb of Petit Jean, and I got very excited about hopefully finding the real Petit Jean, who, as you guys know, if you're familiar with Central Arkansas, the legend is that this was a woman during the French colonial period in Louisiana who, in order to remain with her lover, disguised herself as a cabin boy, stowed away on a ship, went with her lover, who was a sailor, to Louisiana, and ended up revealing herself to him right at the site of Petit Jean Mountain, where she then dies under sort of mysterious circumstances and is accompanied by adoring Native Americans who give her these funeral celebrations. And I recognize these kind of tropes that you see in a lot of American stories. Philip Deloria, who's a Dakota historian, has called this playing Indian. It's basically when US mythologies kind of take up this idea that there is an Indian presence that is affirming Anglo-American westward expansion. And the idea there is you can kind of honor the Indian and subsume their continued existence in your region, but also the realities of them as historical actors in the past. So it sounded like that kind of thing was happening. And I knew not to jump to the conclusion that it was completely made up, because a very similar story had taken place in my hometown in the Piscataqua region of New England, right there on the border between Maine and New Hampshire, where for years people had said that the supposed praying Indian saint on the top of a mountain that we call Abenquid was actually made up and the figment of Victorian imagination. And then a Mi'kmaq historian wrote into our local newspaper to say, no, in fact, this is a real person, and we make a pilgrimage from Halifax with our tribe every year to see this gravesite. So I knew not to jump to conclusions that this was all made up. But I got really excited, and I started pouring through the census records passenger lists, looking for who this Petit Jean could have actually been. And of course, I opened up the very important monograph, Colonial Arkansas, excellent book by Judge Morris Arnold, and found a tiny footnote talking about this legend that pulled me toward a document, and I'll pull it up for you. My students who are in the room already know the secret, so for me it was very exciting. Pulled me to a document from 1734. And this is the governor of Louisiana at the time, writing all the way to Versailles, to the head of French imperialism in the Empire, the Ministry of the Navy. And he's saying that there has been news. It was reported, I'll just quote the whole thing for you, that Indian savages in French they use the word sauvage, just to be clear, that doesn't mean necessarily anything, it's just how they translated the word Indian. From the Osage Nation, killed 11 Frenchmen, but it turned out that they had only killed a slave and a man named Petit Jean, who was a Bohemian. You can maybe make out that right there, it's a big capital B. Petit Jean, qui était Bohème. When they, the Osage, learned from Mr. Diron d'Artaguette, who's the Inspector General of Louisiana, was planning to mobilize the nations against them to avenge this murder, they instructed the traders to apologize to him on their behalf and assure him that they had not intended to kill any Frenchmen, and that they were willing to accept any recompense he would ask of them. Not content with that, they went to the Arkansas Post to apologize to the officer in charge and paid the value of the dead slave. Thus, he, Pierre-Louis Petit-Blanche, who was the governor of Arkansas Post, does not believe it necessary to pursue the matter any further, considering the current state of affairs. Okay, so what was going on? France was about to mobilize troops against the Osage for this apparent slight against Frenchmen, this murder of 2 and the escape of 9 others. What was going on that all of a sudden they accept this apology, the payment for the one unnamed enslaved man, and just move along? And we know at this time that the Osage are increasingly angry about incursions from the Quapaw and their French allies into their hunting grounds in the west part of the Arkansas River Valley, and this is probably part of that they confront these hunters. But there is potentially another reason why the French officer did not exact the revenge that they were planning. First thing is, yes, there were not 11 killed, there were just these 2. But what were their identities? Now, we can't know the identity of the unnamed enslaved person, but Petit Jean is described as Bohème. And Bohème has been translated by several authors who've looked into this, including Judge Morris Arnold, as a tramp, somebody who's kind of like a vagabond, like a bohemian in that sense. In fact, in the early 18th century, Bohème meant a person of Romani background, who was deported from France in this very large Roma diaspora that France sent at a certain moment under Louis XIV's reign, deported multiple prisoners, and Louisiana being a penal colony, hundreds end up in Louisiana. Now, very often these are actually women, some coming with husbands, some coming with children. The deportations happen right before the date, or before rather, the date of this 1734 July letter and of the murder of Petit Jean. So that was a surprise to me when I put it together that this poem, the most plausible case for the real Petit Jean was a Romani person, and that the Osage who had supposedly killed Petit Jean, they claimed to have mistaken him for an Indian, okay, and did not think he was a Frenchman. This also could be a clue about maybe the skin color of this person as perceived by the Osage. Now this is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that I think is most interesting for is because the real Petit Jean, or at least the figure who most likely lent his name to the river and by extension the mountain, epitomizes that kind of French heritage that the fake kinds serve to obfuscate. In a way that minimizes harm, maximizes understanding. And one of the things that we did is we decided to rewrite these little portions of history involving Romani people without using information that we got from several Romani authored sources, without using terms that were considered offensive now. So I don't even put them in this project at all. And in fact, the etchings used most often to depict Romani life in early modern France are these etchings from the late 17th century, an engraver named Creole. But what I chose to do instead in this spirit is to revisit them, but through the renderings. They're actually a textile collage by the Polish Romani artist Mirga. So this is her beautiful Out of Egypt series, which is kind of like a Romani person's take on these etchings, which often showed a really exoticized, romanticized idea of what it was to be Romani, and have been very pervasive in the literature from early modern Europe. So, I don't have much time left to talk about Petit Jean, but you're probably wondering how did we go from this plausible case for the origin of Petit Jean to the one that we're more familiar with. And I'm working on a timeline for everybody of all the mentions that I can find of Petit Jean, the legend of, in the literature and how it changes over time. And I do want to point us to one very fascinating thing. In 1869, the Arkansas Gazette is publishing an article from the Dardanelle Times that is trying to promote settlement in that area. And it relays a local legend of a cook, Petit Jean, who served as a party of soldiers, and he was killed by Osage along the Arkansas, and his friends buried him on the top of the mountain, which they named after him. Okay, so it sounds sort of similar, like we're moving toward the one that we know. 1878, already by then, the Dardanelle Western Immigrant, similarly trying to get people to settle, publishes a new variation on the legend, and now it's a French woman who disguises herself as a sailor to follow her lover to the New World. The lover accidentally is pushed overboard into the Petit Jean River, leading to her death by freezing. And this may be the first appearance in print of that legend of the female Petit Jean. But the person who is most influential in disseminating this idea is very important to Arkansas history. And that is a man named, I can pull it up here, Dr. Thomas William Hardison, who was crucial in establishing the state park system, and especially Petit Jean State Park as the first state park in the Arkansas system. He produced lots of brochures that popularized that very legend and spread them out all over Arkansas. It was he did not ever say that it was definitely true, but he definitely put it in all of his literature, trying to popularize the idea of establishing the state park system, the oldest property of which goes back to 1921. So that is my beginnings of trying to excavate the history of the legend itself. But I'm going to close what I was talking about here now and talk about the second project that we're very excited to be working on here. So this is a project that Dr. Cheeslack, Dr. Just Porter, and Emily Houston and I are working with on the UA Little Rock downtown side, with partners in the French island of Réunion. There is a museum in Réunion Island called the Musée de Villèle, and it is focused on teaching the history of slavery and the slave trades worldwide, but especially from the perspective of these French Western Indian Ocean islands. So one of the things we're really excited about is the idea of bringing Arkansas history global, right? Bringing a global dimension to Arkansas history. And I taught a course last semester, some of my students from that course are here, in which we looked at race and global perspective. And we worked to unpack an exhibit that the Musée de Villèle had put on about a man named Furcy Madeleine who sued for his freedom in the early 19th century in the French court system, and eventually, after many, many years, won in a really fascinating victory. But the justification for his freedom suit was a racial one. He argued like about 10 to 15% of enslaved people in these Western Indian Ocean islands were called Black, but they were South Asian, okay, of South Asian ancestry. And his lawyers argued, one of their arguments for the reason why Furcy Madeleine should be free was that he was South Asian. So it became a really important argument in the case. And something that we noticed in Arkansas is that we have similar cases, 2 or 3 maybe, in Arkansas that reached the courts in the middle of the 19th century. And these are also cases whereby enslaved people sued for their freedom on racial grounds. The grounds being that it was in positive law, it was in the law that if you were white, you could not be enslaved. And if you were Black, or what they called mulatto, which they defined at first as 1/4 African ancestry or more, or less actually at certain points, that you could be enslaved, okay? So her lawyers went to court on behalf of this one case, 1855 case of Abby Guy. Her lawyers go to court arguing that she is actually white, and she has a story in a deposition, in a petition rather, that she submits as evidence to the court that says that she is the daughter of a woman who was captured, a white woman from Virginia who was an orphan and captured and sold into slavery illegally, wrongfully. And then she's the descendant of that woman, that she and her children are white, and that they therefore should be freed from their enslaver, their master in Arkansas. So these are images of my students and I talking with the writers of the Furcy Madeleine exhibit in Réunion Island and talking about our ideas to try to make panels that kind of resonate with the same kind of arguments in that case for our local Arkansas case. And I have lots more pictures, I'm gonna embarrass you guys, of the time that we were really, really lucky that we got to go to the Bowen Law Library, which houses a lot of the documents related to that 1855 freedom suit. And Professor Melissa Surface showed us the original documents that we got to handle ourselves and start trying to transcribe. Luckily, we had digitized photos so we could work and take the time required to do the transcription. But all of this is to say that the very exciting news is that from May through October, there will be an exhibit here at UA Little Rock downtown, thanks to a beautiful grant put together by Dr. Marta Gislag from the Arkansas Humanities Council that is going to juxtapose these two seemingly very different cases, right? One from the Western Indian Ocean and one from right here in Arkansas, talking about what they can tell us about the nature of slavery, the nature of freedom, through these court documents. So that is really exciting, everybody. I hope you stay tuned for that. And with that, I'm sharing over time. So I'm gonna stop now, and I'm excited for your questions and comments.
You're right on time, that's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so that is cool. We want to help promote that. That is awesome. Questions from the audience here before I get to a couple of questions on Zoom. Everybody on Zoom wants to know where the website is.
Yeah, I can share the website, but it's in beta form right now.
Okay.
I need to make sure that everything is in tip-top shape. But I will definitely share the website once it's ready to go, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, that was A wonderful website. That's what everybody was asking on Zoom. Can we have the website? So good. But I understand beta. I
As the
understand.
creator of that website, noticing how slow it was moving, there's a couple things I have to fix for sure. So yeah, I was a little embarrassed about that.
Any other questions? Yes, Marta.
Do we know why the refugees from the Haitian Revolution, why they ended up in Arkansas specifically?
So I'm looking for a connection, like did somebody know somebody else? There are two very important French-speaking settlements that are like 4 to 5 hours from us by car now, Saint-Geneviève in Missouri and Natchitoches in Louisiana, which became magnets for the diaspora from the Haitian Revolution. They knew people. I think that it's an offshoot of one or the other of those communities. Something about the proximity to Arkansas, having the ability also to purchase land here. There's something going on, but I need to get to the bottom of it for sure.
Any other questions? Well, this was fascinating. We don't often get to spend time in, France, in Arkansas, or at Legacies and lunch. So thank you so much for doing this and for being here.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
So next month, we have our notes out. Next month, move forward. Oh, first of all, Second Friday Art Night, this Friday, right? This Friday, from 5 to 8 at the Rocket Lab, which is the triangular building that you might have previously known as the Cox Building, because we like to rename things. And so Rocket Lab, 5 to 8 this Friday, Second Friday Art Night. Bring a friend, bring a date, make it a night of art, music, and mingling. And our 2 fan activities are underwritten by the Wingate Foundation. So next month, on April 3rd at noon, here in this space, we're gonna have Susan Kelly talk about the life and times of Ozarks newspaper woman Lucille Morris Upton. I wonder if she's any relationship to the Upton that you talked about last night. So come next month, April 3rd, noon. You come in person, you get a cookie. It's a Boulevard cookie. Let me repeat, it's a Boulevard cookie. But if you are virtual, you don't get a cookie. So thanks, everybody.